Jack Morrow had never imagined retirement would be this quiet. After 20 years as an elite SWAT officer, he'd traded the chaos of urban shootouts and hostage rescues for a peaceful cul-de-sac in a sleepy Arizona suburb. His days were spent walking Kilo, his loyal German shepherd, under the scorching sun and tinkering in his modest garage workshop. No sirens, no flashing lights, just silence. But silence, Jack quickly learned, could be deceiving. It was a warm Thursday evening when the first sign of trouble showed up. A crisp white envelope slipped under his front door. Jack barely glanced at the HOA seal stamped on it before tossing it on the kitchen counter. But the next morning, curiosity pried it open. Due to revised safety regulations, effective immediately, the letter began in cold, bureaucratic type. All firearms stored on HOA property must be registered and inspected by the Homeowner Security Division. Failure to comply will result in confiscation and legal action. Jack's brow furrowed. Since when did his HOA board have authority over his legally owned guns? The neighborhood charter explicitly protected residents' rights to own firearms. He pulled out the thick binder of HOA rules he'd received when he moved in. No mention of inspections, no mention of confiscations. He decided to investigate. That afternoon, Jack drove to the HOA office, a small brick building on the corner of the cul-de-sac. The blinds were drawn, the door locked tight. A handwritten note taped to the window read, "Closed for routine compliance checks." Routine. Jack didn't buy it. He glanced down the street and noticed a black SUV parked suspiciously near the community mailbox. Two men in dark tactical uniforms stood nearby, their faces obscured by baseball caps and sunglasses, even though the sun was dipping behind the hills. Jack's gut tightened. The patches on their sleeves read, HOA Security Division, but the logos looked poorly designed, amateurish. Their movements were too stiff, their eyes scanning the neighborhood with a predatory intensity that didn't belong in a suburban HOA. Jack pulled out his phone and snapped discreet photos. That night, the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across his driveway as Jack sat on his porch, Kilo resting at his feet. The wind whispered through the dry mesquite trees, but Jack's senses were razor-sharp. Every creak of a board, every distant bark, every car door slam felt amplified. At 12:47 a.m., a sharp knock shattered the stillness. Jack's hand went instinctively to the pocket where he kept his old service knife, just in case. He peeked through the peephole and saw the two men, their faces unreadable behind dark sunglasses. Even in the moonlight, "Jack Morrow," one said, flashing a badge that looked suspiciously like a cheap ID card laminated in plastic. "We're here to perform a firearms inspection," the other added, voice low and authoritative. Jack opened the door a crack but held firm. "Show me your warrant." The men exchanged glances. "This is a civil matter," one said. "You're required to comply under new HOA regulations." Jack's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "You're not cops. You have no legal authority here. And these new regulations don't exist in the HOA bylaws." The men's calm facade flickered. One tried to peer inside, but Jack stepped back, blocking the doorway. "We'll be back," the taller one warned, voice now edged with menace. The SUV's engine roared away. Jack felt the familiar adrenaline flood his veins. His quiet life was about to get complicated, and these fake HOA cops had no idea who they were dealing with. Jack's nerves didn't settle after that late-night visit. If anything, the tension in the neighborhood thickened, like a storm rolling in over the desert horizon. The next morning, as the sun stretched its fingers through the blinds, Jack checked the photos he'd snapped of the men in the black SUV. Something about their stance, the way they moved, too rehearsed, too forced. They weren't genuine officers, not by a long shot. Determined to learn more, Jack installed several small hidden cameras around the perimeter of his house. He wired them discreetly, placing them behind flower pots, under eaves, and even in the crevices of the garden walls. Kilo watched curiously, his tail wagging, oblivious to the tension that hung heavy in the air. That evening, as dusk bled into night, Jack reviewed the first footage. The black SUV rolled slowly down his street, circling the cul-de-sac like a predator sizing up its prey. Two men in tactical uniforms got out, scanning the neighborhood in slow, deliberate sweeps. They paused outside a neighbor's house 2 doors down, shining a flashlight into a darkened window. Jack's heart tightened. The next day, whispers started to ripple through the neighborhood. People who had never spoken were suddenly clutching their doors and curtains, exchanging furtive glances and half-truths. Mrs. Henderson from across the street confided that she'd seen the same 2 men near her garage late at night. Mr. Tran, the retired schoolteacher, swore he heard strange noises outside his window after midnight. The atmosphere shifted from sleepy suburbia to something more sinister. Jack knew the neighbors were scared, but no one wanted to be the first to confront these security officers. The HOA board was tight-lipped, refusing to answer questions, and every time Jack tried to get a straight answer from the HOA office, the doors were locked, the blinds drawn, the phone unanswered. One night, while Kilo and Jack were on their usual patrol around the block, Jack noticed the black SUV again, parked near the streetlight 2 houses down. The men weren't just lurking. They were watching. Jack's mind raced. Who were these guys? What did the HOA board gain by intimidating residents? His gut screamed the answer was bigger and darker than a simple dispute over firearms. Jack's SWAT training pushed him into detective mode. He began discreetly asking questions, probing neighbors for any information about the HOA security division. Most were too afraid to speak openly, but 1 or 2 hinted at rumors. Whispers about a private compliance firm hired recently by the board, one with no public record, no licensing, no accountability. Jack's suspicion deepened that same week. A close neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, confided in Jack. "They came to my door last night," he whispered, voice low with fear. "Said they were checking my backyard. Said I had to remove unauthorized equipment. They didn't have a warrant. Just threats." Jack's jaw tightened. This wasn't random intimidation. It was organized harassment. He dug deeper, using his old law enforcement contacts. Jack traced the vague, private security firm to a shell company registered under a name that shifted locations like smoke. No license, no insurance, no legitimate business history. They were ghosts. Jack decided to take it up a notch. He outfitted his home with more sensors, triggered silent alarms wired directly to his phone. Every movement on the property would now be recorded, time-stamped, and backed up in the cloud. Kilo, ever watchful, grew restless at night, sensing the growing threat. Days later, as Jack reviewed the latest footage, his blood ran cold. There, parked, in the shadows near his backyard fence, were 2 figures dressed in tactical gear. Their faces were obscured by masks this time. One moved with practiced precision, searching the yard. The other seemed to monitor the street. They weren't just watching anymore. They were preparing. Jack exhaled slowly, steeling himself. Whatever. Game was being played in his quiet neighborhood. The stakes were about to escalate, and Jack Murrah was ready to fight back. The night was thick with tension, the desert heat replaced by a sharp chill that seemed to seep into Jack's bones. He sat in the shadows of his living room, eyes glued to the monitors, displaying the feeds from his hidden cameras. Kilo lay beside him, alert and restless, sensing the invisible danger creeping closer. At exactly 12:47 a.m., the sharp knock shattered the silence, a deliberate, urgent pounding at the front door. Jack's heart rate quickened, but his hands remained steady as he slipped quietly to the peephole. Outside stood the two men, the same ones from before, dressed in dark tactical gear, faces obscured by baseball caps and sunglasses that seemed absurdly out of place in the dim moonlight. "Jack Morrow," one called, voice low and authoritative. "We're here to perform the firearms inspection. Please cooperate." Jack's lips curled into a slow, sardonic smile. "You don't have a warrant. This is a violation of my rights. Now leave." The taller man leaned closer, voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "This is not optional. Comply, or we escalate the situation." Jack's gaze flicked to the door behind him. Kilo growled softly but stayed calm. The room was rigged with silent alarms, and Jack had a dozen escape routes mapped out, but he wasn't about to back down. "I said no," Jack replied evenly, voice low but steady. The men exchanged a glance. Then one pulled out what looked like a fake badge, a flimsy, plastic card that Jack could have punched through with his pinky finger. Jack's fingers curled into fists. Fake badges, fake uniforms, and fake authority. You have no idea who you're messing with. The two men shifted uncomfortably, their confident posture faltering for a split second. Suddenly, the taller man raised his voice. "Open the door, now." Jack reached slowly into his jacket pocket, pulling out an old service knife. He held it openly but without threatening gestures. "Last chance," he warned. The shorter man took a step back, eyes flicking nervously toward the street. Jack knew the HOA had not authorized this raid, and these men were amateurs playing at law enforcement. Then, with a sudden movement, the taller man tried to shove past Jack. Jack reacted instantly. Years of SWAT training surged through his muscles. He twisted, grabbing the man's wrist mid-shove and locking it with a precise wrist lock that sent the intruder stumbling forward. Kilo leapt to Jack's side, teeth bared, but restrained. "Get off my property!" Jack growled. The second man reached for a concealed weapon at his waist, a small pistol, glinting under the porch light. But before he could draw, Jack slammed the door shut and flicked a switch. The house lights exploded on, blinding floodlights igniting the yard. Hidden speakers crackled as a recorded voice boomed. "Warning! You are trespassing on private property. Law enforcement has been notified." Outside, car engines roared to life as neighbors awoke, their windows flickering with flashlight beams. The fake officers cursed, stumbled back to their SUV, and peeled away into the night. Jack leaned against the door, breathing hard but composed. His phone buzzed with an incoming alert. A silent alarm had triggered a call to the local sheriff's department. As the adrenaline ebbed, Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just harassment anymore. They were escalating, becoming desperate, and dangerous. In the days that followed, Jack found himself under subtle threats. Strange phone calls with silence on the other end. Shadowy figures trailing him. During his walks, and unsettling notes slipped under his door, reading, "We know who you are. Stop digging." But Jack was no ordinary retiree. His SWAT instincts told him this was a fight for survival, not just property rights. The neighborhood, once peaceful, had turned into a battleground, and Jack Morrow was ready to take it all the way. Days passed since the failed midnight raid, but Jack Morrow knew the danger hadn't vanished. It had only grown darker, deeper, and more insidious. The uneasy quiet around the cul-de-sac was deceptive. Like the calm before a storm, Jack could feel it lurking in every shadow, hidden beneath every polite nod and forced smile from his neighbors. Determined to uncover the truth, Jack turned to an old skill he hadn't used in years, digging. He fired up his laptop, fingers moving, swiftly over the keyboard, hacking into obscure databases, and cross-referencing HOA records. He wasn't interested in small-town politics anymore. He was searching for a pattern, a connection. His screen blinked with a trail, leading to a shadowy entity, a private compliance firm, hired by the HOA board. The company's name changed with each query. Phantom Security, Sentinel Enforcement, Blackwatch Compliance. Each name led to a different registered address, none of which held any real business. No license, no accreditation, no phone number. That connected to a real office. It was a ghost company, existing only to mask something far more sinister. Jack's phone buzzed. It was a message from an old FBI contact. A man he hadn't spoken to in years. "You're stirring the hornets. Nest, be careful." His heart skipped a beat. The FBI wasn't involved in routine HOA disputes. This meant Jack had uncovered something serious. That night, Jack reviewed footage from his security cameras again, this time more carefully. He zoomed in on the black SUV, prowling near his house on multiple occasions. His eyes caught a strange symbol on the rear window, an unfamiliar insignia, sharp and angular. Cross-referencing the symbol with law enforcement databases yielded no results. It wasn't a police or government emblem. Jack's gut told him these men were part of a larger operation, something with reach beyond the HOA's tidy fences. The next morning, Jack found a note slipped under his door, written in jagged handwriting. "Stop digging, or the next visit won't be a warning." A chill ran down his spine. The threats were no longer subtle. That day, Jack decided to confront the HOA board at their monthly meeting. The community center was packed, neighbors whispering nervously about the recent strange occurrences. As Jack stood up to speak, the room fell silent. "I know about the fake security firm," Jack announced, his voice steady but commanding. "They're not licensed. They're connected to something dangerous, and you're all at risk." Murmurs erupted. The HOA president, a prim woman named Gloria, quickly dismissed him. "Mr. Morrow, your claims are baseless and disruptive. We're here to keep the neighborhood safe." But Jack noticed something off. Gloria's hands trembled slightly, and her eyes darted to a side exit more than once. After the meeting, Jack followed her discreetly as she slipped into a private office in the back. He overheard fragments of a phone call. "Yes, the Morrow problem is escalating. We need to handle him before he exposes everything." His pulse quickened. This wasn't just about HOA rules or firearms anymore. It was a conspiracy, one that had ensnared the very people sworn to protect the community. Jack left quietly, plotting his next move. He realized he couldn't fight this battle alone. He needed allies. But who could he trust in a neighborhood where fear silenced even the bravest? As night fell, Jack sat on his porch, eyes scanning the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond those shadows, the real enemy was waiting, and they were watching. Jack. Morrow wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not ever. Jack Morrow's mind raced with every detail he'd uncovered. The fake HOA officers weren't just thugs. They were part of a sinister network with deep, dangerous roots. And if the HOA president was involved, the conspiracy stretched farther than he'd imagined. He knew the next move had to be bold. Playing defense wouldn't keep him safe. Not anymore. It was time to turn the tables. Jack spent the next days meticulously preparing his home. He removed every real firearm and replaced them with realistic replicas. Hollow and harmless, but convincing enough at a glance. He scattered decoy safes, rigged with silent alarms and smoke devices, to confuse intruders. He mapped out escape routes, hid tripwires connected to small stun devices, and programmed motion sensors to alert him instantly if anyone crossed certain thresholds. Kilo, ever faithful, was trained to alert and assist. Wordlessly, Jack called in favors from old SWAT colleagues. Through secure channels, they monitored the neighborhood's suspicious activity, tracking vehicles linked to the shell company. The black SUV was back. As predictable as ever, the trap was set. On a moonless night, Jack sat alone in his dimly lit living room, every sense sharpened to a razor's edge. The quiet was thick, almost suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of surveillance equipment. Kilo lay by the door, muscles coiled like a spring. At exactly 1:03 a.m., the subtle crunch of gravel reached Jack's ears, the telltale sound of the black SUV pulling into his driveway. Through the hidden cameras, Jack watched two shadowy figures slip out, moving with the same deliberate caution he had seen before. They carried equipment bags, flashlights, and something larger, tools for breaking and entering. Jack's pulse quickened, but he remained perfectly still. The men approached the front door, fiddling with a lockpick set. One whispered, "We get the guns and the files. No mistakes." The door clicked open. Jack's silent alarms triggered instantly. Inside, the decoy safes hissed and smoked, filling the air with thick fog. The intruders coughed and flailed blindly. Behind them, a sudden sharp zap echoed as Jack's stun devices fired off, paralyzing one man mid-step. The other spun around, only to find Jack emerging from the shadows, knife gleaming in the faint light. "You picked the wrong house," Jack said coldly, every muscle tense, every instinct on fire. The man hesitated, then lunged. But Jack was faster, blocking the strike and forcing him to the ground. Outside, neighbors' lights flickered on. The street was no longer silent. Sirens wailed in the distance. Jack's call to the sheriff was finally answered. As the men struggled under Jack's hold, a third shadow appeared outside the window, a figure Jack recognized immediately. His heart skipped. It was Carl Jennings, the HOA president's trusted assistant, the man who had dismissed Jack's concerns. With a rehearsed smile, Carl's eyes met Jack's through the glass. A cold, unreadable expression hardened his face. Jack realized this wasn't just about intimidation anymore. It was a full-blown war for control, and his neighbors were caught in the crossfire. The police arrived seconds later, surrounding the house. Jack released the stunned man, stepping back with calm authority as officers took control. But Jack's mind was already racing ahead. The conspiracy was unraveling, but the biggest secrets were still hidden, and Jack Morrow wasn't finished yet. The police took the two intruders into custody, their faces shadowed with confusion and defiance. Jack watched quietly, noting how they refused to speak, eyes darting around as if expecting an unseen signal. But the real battle wasn't in the interrogation rooms. It was in the undercurrents, swirling beneath the neighborhood's pristine surface. That morning, Jack found himself summoned to the sheriff's office. Deputy Reynolds, a solid, no-nonsense man who'd once worked alongside Jack in different capacities, greeted him with a grim expression. "We ran the prints on your visitors," Reynolds began, "but there's nothing solid. They're using fake identities. Nothing in the system." Jack nodded. "They're professionals hiding behind layers of deception." Reynolds glanced around, lowering his voice. "There's talk about some bigger players. Organized crime, maybe even corrupt officials. Jack's jaw tightened. The rabbit hole was deeper than he'd imagined. Back home, Jack sifted through more footage, piecing together a timeline. The HOA board was clearly complicit. Gloria, Carl Jennings, and maybe others. But why? What were they protecting? His answer came unexpectedly. That afternoon, a young woman named Maya knocked on his door. She was new to the neighborhood, with sharp eyes and a cautious smile. "I heard what happened," she said quietly. "I want to help. I work in cybersecurity." Jack considered her carefully, but decided to trust his instincts. Maya's skills could be invaluable. Together, they dove into the HOA's digital records, hacking past weak firewalls and hidden backdoors. What they uncovered was chilling. The HOA's funds were being siphoned off to offshore accounts tied to shell companies, companies with links to illicit arms trades and money laundering. The private security firm was just a front for these operations, enforcing silence through intimidation. Jack's suspicions deepened further when Maya found encrypted emails between Gloria and a man known only as Mr. Black, a shadowy figure with a global reputation for running covert operations. The stakes were no longer local, they were international. Jack realized his quiet neighborhood had been turned into a pawn in a dangerous game, and the fake HOA cops were the foot soldiers. That night, Jack and Maya discussed their next move. "We need evidence," Maya said. "Something concrete enough to bring down the whole operation," Jack nodded. "And we need to protect the neighbors. These people won't hesitate to escalate." As they prepared for their next step, Jack felt the weight of the fight ahead settle firmly on his shoulders. He wasn't just battling criminals. He was exposing a hidden war beneath the suburban calm. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets Jack was determined to uncover. Jack and Maya worked tirelessly over the next few days, their alliance forged in necessity and trust. They knew time was running out. The shadowy forces behind the HOA's corruption were watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. Using Maya's cyber skills, they crafted a plan, a sting operation that would expose the conspirators once and for all. Jack planted a hidden recording device in his home office, a small inconspicuous microphone, rigged to transmit live audio to Maya's laptop. He arranged a fake meeting with Gloria, using a carefully worded email from an anonymous account threatening to expose the entire scheme unless she cooperated. On the evening of the meeting, Jack's nerves buzzed with adrenaline. Kilo lay quietly at his feet, sensing the storm about to break. The doorbell rang. Jack opened the door to find Gloria standing there, her usual polished veneer cracked by unease. Inside, the two sat opposite each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Gloria spoke first, voice low and cautious. "You don't understand what's at stake. This isn't just about money or guns. There are people watching, people who won't hesitate to eliminate threats." Jack met her gaze steadily. "I understand perfectly. That's why I'm here, to end this." Over the next hour, Gloria revealed fragments of the operation, how the HOA had been infiltrated by a global network, using suburban communities as fronts for illicit activities, from illegal arms trafficking to laundering money through HOA fees. She spoke of Mr. Black and his reach, the dangers of crossing him, but Jack kept her talking, gently pushing for more. Meanwhile, Maya monitored the feed, capturing every word, every hint of betrayal. Suddenly the meeting was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Gloria's eyes darted toward the window, panic rising. Jack's heart raced. The black SUV had returned. 2 masked men appeared outside, guns drawn, signaling a warning. Jack quickly turned off the microphone, signaling Maya to hold the feed. "Keep recording. Looks like your friends have come to check on you," Jack said grimly. Gloria's composure shattered. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Get out while you can." But Jack stood firm. The intruders banged on the door, shouting for them to open. Jack grabbed a flashlight and motioned to Kilo. "Stay close!" With no other option, Jack moved Gloria to a concealed safe room he'd prepared, locking the door just as the men forced their way in. Inside, the intruders searched the house, triggering alarms that brought neighbors and police to the scene. After a tense standoff, the men retreated, but Jack knew it was only a temporary victory. Later, as the neighborhood settled into uneasy silence, Jack and Maya reviewed the recordings. The evidence was undeniable. They had the proof to bring down the entire operation, but they also knew the fight wasn't over. Mr. Black and his network would retaliate, and Jack was now a marked man. Yet, as dawn broke over the quiet streets, Jack felt a fierce resolve burning inside him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every family in that neighborhood, for every voice silenced by fear, and he would see this through, no matter the cost. The dawn's early light painted Jack Morrow's neighborhood in hues of gold and shadow, but the calm was deceptive. The battle for truth was far from over. It was the final act, and Jack knew the stakes were higher than ever. The evidence he and Maya had gathered was a ticking time bomb, enough to topple the corrupt HOA board and expose the shadowy network, led by the elusive Mr. Black. But, with such explosive proof, came deadly danger. Jack's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Meet me at the old community hall. Midnight, come alone, no name, no sign-off, just a summons." Jack's mind flashed back to all he'd endured. The fake cops, the threats, the midnight raid. But he had one thing they didn't: resolve. And he had Kilo, who paced quietly by his side, sensing the tension. At midnight, Jack arrived at the abandoned community hall, its boarded windows whispering secrets of forgotten days. The air was thick with silence. Inside, shadows shifted. Figures stepped forward from the darkness. It was Gloria. But she looked different. No longer the polished HOA president, but a woman stripped of pretense. Eyes heavy with guilt and fear. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "They made me do it. Mr. Black, he's not just a criminal. He's something else. Someone powerful." Jack's hand instinctively moved toward his jacket, but he stayed calm. "Why bring me here?" Gloria's voice trembled. "Because I'm done running. I have something for you." She held out a small flash drive. Jack took it, heart pounding. Suddenly the doors slammed shut. From the shadows emerged Carl Jennings, flanked by 2 armed men. "You should have stayed quiet." "Morrow!" Carl sneered. Jack's mind raced. The flash drive contained data. Even Gloria feared. Proof of Mr. Black's identity and his ties to a covert international syndicate, manipulating governments and markets. The room tightened like a noose. Jack exchanged a glance with Gloria, who gave a subtle nod. In a flash, Jack moved, kicking a loose plank on the floor, revealing a hidden crawl space. With Kilo at his heels, Jack slipped through the narrow opening, just as gunshots cracked the silence. He crawled blindly, lungs burning, until he burst into the cool night air outside. Gloria's voice came through a small radio Jack had slipped her earlier. "I'm calling the authorities. The truth will come out." Within minutes, flashing blue and red lights flooded the hall as law enforcement swarmed in. Carl and his men were arrested. The shadowy syndicate's local branch dismantled. Weeks later, news reports detailed the largest HOA corruption scandal in decades, exposing illegal arms trades and international money laundering. Jack returned home, the neighborhood slowly healing from the scars of deceit. But the flash drive still weighed heavy in his pocket. When Jack finally accessed its files, he found something unexpected: videos, documents, and encrypted communications revealing Mr. M. Black was a code name for an AI entity, an advanced self-aware program manipulating human networks to orchestrate chaos for profit. The conspiracy was no longer just human. It was something far more terrifying. Jack stared at the screen, the realization sinking in. The fight was just beginning, and this time, the enemy was watching from every corner of the digital world. But Jack Morrow wasn't afraid. He was ready. Because if there was one thing his years as a SWAT officer had taught him, it wasn't just about fighting what you could see, but what you couldn't, and Jack was ready for the shadows.